You know, some people do YouTube videos where they like actually set up.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of the video, I'll show you a girl. She literally will like throw her pillow down and sit down and then start talking.
I love that. I like that actually.
We might want to include that in the future. I don't know.
Oh. Yeah. It's the mic on. Oh, flip. It's filming. Producing a play for the first time. Not for the faint-hearted, my friend.
Yeah, especially if that play has 6 actors, no director, no funding, and basically no blueprint about how to get it from A to Z.
Right? The question is, how did we do it? That is the question.
And you know what the answer is? Honestly, we just did.
We just did.
we just, that's the answer. We took it on, we saw a finish line, and we ran down the track until we crossed it. Quite literally. Metaphorically, literally, you know.
But definitely there was more to it. So I think this is deserving of a video in itself.
Story time!
What was the play, Mr. Kavaya? Would you like to tell us?
Why not? It was a play called Boujie, penned by yours truly. Rhyme not intended, kind of intended. I thought about it and it just worked. It was a play called Boujie that I wrote that centered around a group of friends who congregate for a housewarming to celebrate one of them who has moved into a new luxury apartment. My desire to write it came during the time when we were at drama school, when I really wanted to see a play that represented the relationship that I had with my friends at the time. I really didn't see any theatrical representation about young professionals of colour on stage. I had no idea what the story was going to be. I just knew the characters I wanted to see and where I wanted them to be. That was basically the main constant. And the story kind of found itself while I was working on the script over a few drafts. And we sort of landed on this narrative about the central character, Devin, who's an entertainment blogger, trying to celebrate his success with his friends while also trying to conceal the extent of said success.
Ooh. Intrigued? Maybe one day we'll bring it back. But before then, like, how did we bring it to life? That is the question. Firstly, we found a venue.
Like,
as you do.
I mean, is it rocket science? It might be rocket science because I don't know, is it the first thing you do? Before we go on, we should say that the things we will be talking about here to some extent, we have actually covered in a bit more detail in another video, generally about theatre producing, which we will link in the description should you wish to check that out.
So our venue. Oh, see, I'm obsessed with beautiful pubs with theatres.
Would you believe it? Like pubs.
The chips are great. Like, the chips are great. They got me at good food. Like, pubs have the best food.
They do.
Like, they
have
really
amazing
do.
food. Depending on the pub, but yeah, generally speaking.
Drayton Arms Theatre on Old Brompton Road. Such a gem.
Such a gem.
Emailed them and they got back.
Literally, it was
so friendly. It just felt right.
It did.
And it felt right because of, like, the play itself. Like
a play called Boujie in an area that is basically bougie. Like, come on.
Perfect.
How we knew about the theatre, I went to a play there randomly a few years prior, and I just remember that the stage had some really bespoke features that were quite unusual, decorative, that I thought would really suit the atmosphere of the show. So we just took a chance and we reached out and they said yes. And then before we knew it, we had to plan an entire show. Like what? When I first wrote the play, there was an opportunity to stage it in a festival, like a small-scale festival. This is before we were Unshaded Arts. This is before we even had a theatre company. We kind of just took that opportunity, found a bunch of actors, most of whom were our friends, and staged it. One thing we didn't know, and this is actually quite important, is that plays usually need to be tested in front of an audience before you get a play programmed in whatever capacity, whether it is programmed by a mainstream theatre, whether it is that you are putting it on through a theatre company, whether you're starting your own theatre company to put on a play. Your play usually needs to go through a process of development, which I was very unfamiliar with at the time. I just thought you could write an amazing script and put it on. And that's essentially what we did in the first instance of it. There was a lot about that process of putting it on for the festival that was really stressful because there was just a lot we didn't know. Again, as I mentioned in our theatre producing video, when you put on work, there's a lot you don't know that you're confronted with.
Yeah.
But that performance was successful. So I was hopeful that that avenue that I had gone down would lead to a bit more opportunity. But it didn't, and we had to find a way to remount it. What I didn't realise was that's quite a normal part of the theatre making process, especially if you are a theatre company putting on work on the fringe circuit. It's very common and actually expected that you will mount your show over and over again until you get it right, if you like.
Yeah, a lot of trial and error, to be honest.
A lot of trial and error. Because that's how you learn. That's how you learn what lands with the audience. Spoiler alert, if you're a writer out there and maybe not one with a lot of development experience, listen, if you're out there and can write the perfect script on a first draft, call me, because I don't know that anybody has that skill. So much of writing is rewriting. And so much of what honestly, it is. And the process of
love that.
Well, the thing is as well, because I mean, again, we have to remember in this capacity, we're artist producers. We are producers who produce our art. So we're not just taking on the producing capacity, we're also taking on the creative capacity. And again, when there isn't a lot of guidance or a lot of nurturing in that area, you're having to learn a lot by trial and error, quite literally. And in order for your work to be at its best, you usually need to write it more than once, the long and short of it. You need to go through a period of dramaturgy, you need feedback, because you don't know what's going to resonate with people or how it's even going to come across. And a lot of that is also to do with how it's presented. You might present it a certain way in your first run, realize maybe there were things you could do differently, you try it out for the second one. So that was a very normal part of the process that I didn't realize was normal at the time. But anyway, that festival experience sort of just led to a great performance and nothing else. We were talking about setting up a theatre company, and we said, okay, maybe this is the show to do that with.
It felt right.
It felt right.
Considering the fact that it had a performance before. You know what I mean? It felt like the right thing, the right step. And we were kind of like at that point where we were like, it's time to take a risk. And looking back, I think we bit more than we could chew.
Oh, girl. Which we'll talk a little bit about a little bit later.
Mildly, but I do think that I'm so happy that we did.
Absolutely.
We took that risk.
The risk was worth it. And the good thing about having done the first performance is that we had a cast. Because
we did.
Also, spoiler alert, I directed that first iteration. What are you doing, Has? but I did. So we had actors who were committed to the project and wanted to do it again. So what we needed to do was hire a creative team. Now, what I will say was probably one of our first mistakes. We probably made mistakes before this that we're not even acknowledging. But hiring a team after you've already got a performance slot, big risk. Big risk.
Big risk. That still gives me heart palpitations.
Stop. I'm having
why were we doing that?
I'm having palpitations right now. In my heart, I'm having palpitations. But you just don't know. We just didn't realize. And finding directors isn't easy. Finding a creative, sometimes you don't even know you don't even know who on the creative team you actually need to make the show work. So eventually we realized, okay, we need to find a director. And we did find someone who we were having quite positive conversations with. But unfortunately, before we started rehearsals,
they dropped out.
Yeah, you're saying it. But they did. I mean, they were never. The other thing is as well, we weren't contracting people. We didn't work with contracts. So people were sort of tied to the project because they wanted to do it. And so the arrangement with the director was relatively informal, and they got an amazing development opportunity they couldn't pass up, couldn't hate them for it. And they're actually doing incredibly well in their career now. So it probably was the right decision for them. But it meant that we last minute had to find someone. And in our producing video where we elaborate about producing, this is one of those tasks where we say, you have to do certain tasks across every project, like find a creative team, but the way in which you go about finding that team always looks different. So how did we find a director? Facebook. There was no other way at the time. We just had to put a call out on Facebook, and eventually we found someone. And it was a godsend that we found that
Such
person,
a miracle,
because
I was about to say.
we just needed a director, and our director came through, which was amazing.
Mm.
But in terms of how we found other members of our creative team, it's quite...
Mandy, thank you. Because honestly,
we found our set designer through Mandy,
Mm.
and she was a recent graduate. What was really lovely was everyone we worked with was very passionate about the show and wanted to see the show do well.
Yeah.
Worked with knowing that it was a profit share arrangement, because that's essentially how we were. People agreed to be paid was through ticket sales and profit share. So everyone who we did have on board on the creative team, as well as the cast, they worked from a place of passion, which we have to be incredibly grateful for. We found our lighting designer because a member of the cast went to see a show at the Drayton Arms a little bit before we were due to do it, and met a lighting designer working on that show, and just basically said, we've got a show, would you be interested in doing the lighting design and doing the tech operation? That's how we found that person. There was no real polished process about finding a team, but what is probably encouraging to share is that we didn't know these people before we got on board with them in the project. And so when it comes to starting a project and you think you don't have the answers will come. Yeah. They do come. And in our experience, in our experience, they did in that sense. So that was that. Once we had our team, this isn't really in time order, but I'm just trying to remember the core things we did. It was a long time ago.
We raised some money.
Fundraising. We
different
did a bit
ways.
of fundraising.
Yeah, we did a bit of fundraising actually.
We did, and the way in which we primarily did that was through our very first event as a theatre company, which was a fundraiser. It was a community theatre event set in my church hall in Harlesden, Northwest London. If those of you who don't know where Harlesden is, Google it. It's near Wembley. That's the way most people figure it out. And we basically raised money through that, but we also, off the back of that, got some donations from people who couldn't attend but knew what we were doing. So basically between the fundraising, the donations, and our own money, that was how we financed the show. Literally. There was no wonderful grant. We didn't even know how to go about applying for grants or funding. And quite frankly, we just didn't have the resources or the manpower. It was so much to plan the show that those things just didn't compute about how you would even go about doing it.
Yeah. And I think the power of community, I loved that when we had our launch event, just the support, you know, like just the support and just realizing how important our work is, you know, as well. That was really lovely.
It was lovely because we brought theatre to the local community. So they didn't have to go very far for it. It was people who may not readily go to the theatre or readily feel like the theatre is a space for them for whatever reason, and we brought it to them and they loved it from what I heard.
So positive.
They're probably waiting for us to do another one. Watch this space, because we'll get there. Another thing that we had to do was find a way to market the show. And we have some very tough lived experience from this one. One of the things you have to do when you are staging a show is you have to basically get promotional material, photographs that represent the energy of the show. We were lucky in that we had a cast, so we took pre-production pictures with all of the cast, which is quite unique actually for so many actors at that stage. Sometimes you might look at theatre production, pre-production photos, and it might not be the actors who eventually feature in the play, which doesn't hugely matter if we're honest, but at the time, especially for us as newcomers, being of a smaller profile, it was important for us to try and have everyone featured in the show within the marketing material. And we were gifted with a photo shoot session by a friend of ours, Lexi Claire. She's also someone who self-produces and has her own production company. But she basically agreed to take some photos for us. And that was really useful in terms of even for us just finding the energy of the show. What we eventually had to do was give material to the Drayton Arms so that they could put it on their website. We then had to come up with a show blurb. Very overlooked part of the process when you're new. Because as an audience member, what makes you go and see a show? I mean, a number of things probably make you go and see a show, but there's a lot of things about how a show blurb is written that, again, we kind of had to learn on the job. Even just the fact that you put a quote in from your play in the show blurb, I was like, oh, do you do that? Like, you probably don't focus on these things when you're an audience member or realize the importance of having to do it when you're doing it for the first time. But these were things we sort of kind of had to come up with on the fly, I'm not going to lie, because we didn't have anybody guiding us. We had to work out what the show is about. I'm going to be honest, there was some quite interesting mistakes that were made during that process because, so for one thing, on the Drayton Arms website, we had to put whether or not the show had an interval. And the way in which that was displayed was, it was like, okay, Act 1, how many minutes is it? Act 2, how many minutes is it? That wasn't like a personal choice. That was what the website layout had to accommodate. So we didn't have an interval in the show, but the play ran for 90 minutes. And we just put 90 minutes, one act. We'll talk about how that maybe burned us a little bit. But yeah, rookie error. The details of how your show is being presented to the public, so important, even for just a small detail like that. Another thing that was interesting was when we were trying to summarize the show, because you have to kind of summarize it in a number of words or characters, like 40 words you have to try and, or 100 words, depending on how much space you have. You have to try and summarize the show. But you also have to think, okay, what is going to make this show interesting to people? What is going to make people want to review it? So at the time, we were in the middle of the sort of Brexit referendum debacle. The UK had voted out. And so because we were in the aftermath of that vote, I put in the show blurb, because it was set in the present day, that it was set in post-Brexit London. I thought that that meant, and actually it still means to me, that means a London post the Brexit vote. But what a lot of people thought it meant was, it was like this futuristic London post, like, leaving the EU. Yeah, so that was a bit of a mistake on our part. But you learn, you live and you learn. And I mean, in the end, it didn't really derail the show too much, but it's just so important to find accurate ways and effective ways to describe your show, even on aspects of the webpage that you might not think are important. Trust me, they are, and we will get into why that Act 1 was a little bit of an Achilles heel.
Right, moving on. The voices of the underrepresented, those marginalised and the fringes of society, they're about to be heard on stage in West London. Boujie explores the effect success can have on personal relationships while commenting on matters of loyalty, class and career pressure. I'm joined by the writer Hassan Gobia and by Crystal Cole, who stars in this wonderful production. So first of all, Hassan, explain this Boujie thing.
So, okay, Boujie is an informal term. By my understanding, it was popularised from the term bourgeoisie, originally referring to the middle classes of society, the upper classes of society, and over time, certainly in contemporary culture, it is largely a reference to new money, those who are considered a bit elitist, a bit uppity, people with expensive taste, and still being of a higher class or aspiring to be of a higher class than they actually are. So.
Ooh. Crystal, tell me about your character then.
My character, she's a bit of a wild card. Yeah. I don't want to give too much away about her, but she is very bullshy. She is outspoken. She calls people out, and she's not afraid to speak her mind. She's more of the light-hearted characters that come in and turn things upside down, as it were.
So after we sort of did the show blurb, got the pictures, put the information up on the website, at some point we got into rehearsals. Now, you weren't here for rehearsals.
I know.
For good reason.
I had like immigration. Listen, I had to go back for that visa. Like, there was nothing to do, and I really wanted to be there for that because it's just a lot of work, you know, and having to also co-produce whilst you're away, it's not easy, and there's certain things that like I couldn't practically do. And I think what was hard was Hassan was in the show as well. So, you know, trying to do, you know, acting and producing, it was a lot. By the time I came back, I could feel feel the frustration.
I was fried. I was so done. Over time and experience, again, things do get. I mean, pressure is still there, but
Yeah.
it was the first time we were experiencing any of that, and with such a ambitious show as well. So that was really taxing at points when you had to put on different hats. You had to coordinate where you were going to rehearse. You had to coordinate inviting reviewers. You had to coordinate liaising with the venue. You had to coordinate money. And then you also had to find time to refine the script and make sure everybody had a script, because you'd written the script. You would, as a company, provide a script, but I'd also written it. I had to make sure it was ready. I then had to take myself out of producer mode and writer mode and be present in rehearsals with all of my cast. It was a very, very difficult experience, but definitely character building. And would I do it again? I'm going to say yes. I don't know. If we didn't do it, we wouldn't be here. Yeah. I probably would do certain things differently or navigate that experience differently. But you live and you learn, as we say.
You know what I find interesting? I find it interesting the fact that our numbers initially, when the show started, were slightly on the lower side.
They were low. We were slightly on the lower side, they were low. And that also was a bit of a shock to the system, because when we did our test performance, which you also weren't here for, before Chiedza got the visa that she's on now, which is the Global Talent Visa,
which we will talk about.
Which we will talk about in a video, because it is important actually to share that information. But the visa that she was on was, it wasn't, because you were a student and then you had to be on like a tourist visa, didn't you?
Yeah, it was.
So you had to go back. She had to keep going back to Zimbabwe. It just was one of those things. But when we did the test performance, we had my mum worked, Valerie worked overtime to make sure that people were in that audience. But it was just one show. Yeah. So you either could come or you couldn't come. Quite a lot of people didn't come. But this is also a very interesting lesson, because when you're trying to create theatre or do anything that is somewhat audience driven, you cannot do it with the reliance on the fact that your friends and family are going to fill the seats. They can do that for 1 or 2 shows, but you really have to learn, and it's something we're still learning, about how to tap into a theatre paying audience. Working out who your audience is, working out how to reach them, because that's the big issue with things like marketing, is how do you reach the people who would want to see this or would be sold enough by your images, your show blurb, would think, okay, this is great. So we had to rely a lot on a platform that basically gives out complimentary tickets. We had to rely on things like that to try and get our numbers up. But this is where we go back to a marketing fail that we did not really realize the importance of until we were experiencing those low first week numbers. Like, genuinely, the studio theatre was 50 seats and we were lucky to have 10 people in the audience in the first week on any given performance. There were nights we performed to like 4 people, and that actually was quite consistent throughout the first 2 weeks. We had nights of just like seriously low numbers, which, to be honest with you, kind of just is what happens in theatre sometimes, especially if your profile is one of an emerging creative rather than one who's known. But that was the lived experience, and we had to kind of try and go into crisis management and be like, how do we do this? What do we do? And one thing we neglected was the importance of handing out marketing material in the local area and within like central London. So there's places where you can flyer, you can put up posters. Probably a bit more difficult since the pandemic for things like posters and flyers in central London, but at the time, there were places in central London you could go to flyer. We don't mean standing on the streets and flyering. It means
door to door.
Well, in local businesses in central London would let you put the flyers up. But in the local area of the theatre itself, we had to door to door. And that's actually really important to just do that. But tell me why we started to do that in the second week of the show.
Like, what were we doing?
Week 1 was done. And then I was like tearing my hair out, and then I was like, well, we have to fly. It was just advice that we had come across that we realized we hadn't actioned. And again, it's just one of those things of juggling a lot and not really having the manpower to do everything. So the show ran from Tuesday to Saturdays. And so the Monday of the second week and the Tuesday of the second week, we were out and it was November. So it was raining. We were out in that rain, and honestly,
we went through the most.
Torrents, by the way. It wasn't like drizzle. It was like torrents of rain. But we had to basically get these flyers out wherever we could. And I then had to go and perform. So I had to kind of spend
Mm.
at least a day in the rain doing manual door-to-door flyering and then perform on stage, while also carrying the stress of trying to make sure that everybody else in the show is having a fulfilled experience. Because you do feel bad when you've encouraged people to be a part of your show, especially when payment isn't guaranteed, and actually payment is only guaranteed through ticket sales. Stress when people aren't buying any. It was really, really hard, but we did eventually get through that bump, and then towards the last week and a half of the show, the numbers did consistently get better. And I remember there being the second week on the Friday, I think initially I'd seen, only 4 people had booked or something. So I was like, right, prepare yourself for another low night. And then I got out there, and then suddenly it was like almost a half full audience. I was like, who are these people? Which basically led me to believe that the flyering had worked. And that was a nice, heartwarming. But also we had gotten reviews at the time. And that's another thing that we should talk about, is that we invited reviewers. And we do have some interesting stories about that I think we'll save for another video, because
it's a lot.
Just some interesting lessons learned about that. But we invited reviewers, and we had a press night for them, which is what in theatre you tend to do. You have a designated night for reviewers. Some of them didn't come on that night. Some of them came for other performances, which is, again, the good thing about running over an extended period of time, is that people can come at any point during the run if you're happy with that. But we invited them. They came, and across the board, we had a lot of promising, even if the reviews maybe highlighted areas of weakness, generally speaking, most of them spoke to the strength of the show, our intentions with the show, the promise we had as a company for the future. And I do think if anybody got a hold of those reviews, that probably also encouraged them to check the show out. So that was really, really...
And I think what I love about it is, like, their reviews we can still use now.
Absolutely.
Which is like amazing. We can still like put that in our press releases for other things and stuff, which is so beneficial, even for me in terms of my visa, which we'll talk about like in other videos. But that's where you see the real benefit of actually inviting reviewers in.
This show was very essential for your visa. We won't talk about the visa now, but the stress that we talk about, part of the things that made it worthwhile is it really did support you getting the visa that you needed to be able to work here. So we have to be thankful for that, if nothing else. But there's a lot to be thankful for. But I just think it's important to share, when you do create your own work, it's not necessarily, nothing is straightforward. Nothing in life is straightforward. Anything if it was easy, everybody would do it. So anything that's worthwhile is going to come with its challenges. But it is important to see those challenges through, whether the rewards are obvious or not. And hindsight is a beautiful thing, because even though in that moment we didn't necessarily know all of the future benefits in terms of how the press from that show will help us with the press for future shows, these things all come with hindsight and experience. So it is important to keep going. So once we got all of those rickets out the way, the next thing we knew, the show was over.
I know.
I don't know. Is that anticlimactic to you? Because it's kind of anticlimactic to us. That before we knew it was done. All the stress, all of the build up, all of the fun. We had so much fun performing night after night. I have to say that as well, because it was a very fun show. Another thing that was slightly off in our marketing was that initially when we had presented the show, people saw it as a comedy. So we marketed it as a comedy.
Overall, Hassan, it's a comedy, isn't it? Even though there's some serious undertones to this. But you're looking at success, and it's being criticised almost, or just a conversation starter?
Just being observed. I think the main thing is it's a look at how prosperity affects personal relationships, and it's done in a very frantic way, particularly when you are in a position where you've leveled up, so to speak. How does that affect those who know you best and your relationship with those who know you best? Sometimes it's not always negative, and sometimes it's not always positive, so we try and sort of go through the light and shade of that, and just explore it in a very fun way.
And then you get reviews that say, this is not a comedy, this is a drama or a comedy drama, because it didn't appeal to everybody's taste buds. And typically I'm not someone who writes from a place of being comedic. People just find things funny, so you go with it if that's what the majority tells you at the time. But lesson learned, unless you're actively trying to make people laugh, maybe don't market your show as a comedy. Oh, and going back to the one act thing.
Yeah.
So what then happened was with some of our reviews, I don't want to say we were marked down because I don't know whether it affected the stars because I don't know. Stars, we'll do another video about star ratings. We have opinions about that.
Yeah.
But in terms of some of the criticism that was geared towards the show, some of it said, oh, it was a bit long for a one-act play. It wasn't a one-act play. It wasn't. It was just a play without an interval. But because of that detail on the website, that was the thing. People was like, oh, this is a one-act play that goes on for 90 minutes. That's a bit long.
Yeah.
Which I suppose it is, but it was actually a play written in a 3-act structure. So again, rookie error, but we learn from our mistakes.
We do. And I think what I love is that I know you have a different experience because obviously you were producing and you were acting.
Yeah, of course.
But I had the benefit of not being an actor as well, so I could see everything from the outside. Despite the stress, like I enjoyed it. Like I enjoyed obviously you didn't enjoy the process as
I mean,
much,
it was hard,
but like you were so good at channeling that energy, that frustration within like the character. So like in as much as you had your stress, like I knew what was like going on in the background. Like it wasn't showing in your performance.
No,
so like
it shouldn't have.
I think it's just funny in that way.
And she rallied up the troops. So by the time she got here, her friends were helping to pack out that audience, and those things were helpful as well. As much as I say you don't do it exclusively for your friends and family, it is also lovely when they do support you. So don't ever undermine that, as it were. But that basically was the experience of producing our first show. And if it does feel anticlimactic, putting on shows can feel like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you expect this euphoria at the end, which sometimes does come, but a huge learning process of being in this business as creators is that you're almost starting from scratch every time you do a new show. You can build on what you've done before, you can build on the experience, you can build on your learning, but you're probably finding a team from scratch. You're doing a new script from scratch. And so opportunities don't always domino effect, but you can look back and say, this show led me to this place. But sometimes it can feel like maybe you're looking for a bit more instant validation from it. The other thing I would say is that for anyone who wants to put on work specifically to attract industry, that was a huge motivation for me at the beginning. And actually it's not a motivation now, because it's not really one that works unless you already have great connections who are going to show up in the audience. I don't want to speak in general terms because there might be people whose experience differs, but I think a far more constructive intention to have when you're creating your own work is to contribute to the industry rather than attract the industry. Because who is the industry? At this point, we are part of the industry and what it's made up of. You have to trust that you will align with the right opportunities and the right people, but your intention should be to serve the audience. And for anybody who says that, oh, I don't think about the audience, why are you in an audience-driven platform if you're not thinking about the audience? Realistically speaking, why would that be the case? Without an audience, as we experienced by having low numbers, well, what show?
Yeah. So the audience, it does matter.
That doesn't mean you have to people please. Not everybody's going to love what you do, but it doesn't mean they don't get to experience it, to decide that for themselves.
Yeah.
They could still be attracted enough by your promotional material, by the good reviews, whatever it is that gets them in the room. Doesn't mean they have to like it, but it does mean that you can offer an experience that can provoke some critical thinking and conversation. Another thing as theatre makers is you're often encouraged to try and see things that you don't like, because it teaches you maybe about what you want to do.
Yeah.
So maybe if that show isn't for you or that perspective isn't for you, perhaps that can guide you in your creativity some way. And even as an audience member, I do think it's important to try and see things that you wouldn't usually see, or that you wouldn't usually be attracted to. So yeah, that a lot of lessons from putting on our first play, but overall, it got us where we are for various reasons, and for that, we will forever be thankful. And maybe one day you'll see the play if you never got to see it. Let us know in the comments if you did see it. Let us know. Let us know what you thought about it. Let us know in the comments if you did see it. Let us know in the comments if you would like to see it again. You never know, that might have some pull somewhere. And stay tuned for the next video. Thank you for sticking around for this one.
Thanks, guys.
This is fun.
So
I'm
good.
enjoying this.
So chilled.
Chilled.
Yeah.
Just talking about our experience as theatre makers.
Being ourselves.
It's not hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's fun.